Hey y'all, it's Andrea here at VW Family Farm, and today is vegetable harvesting day out of the garden. I've picked a bunch of vegetables from our garden. Our summer garden is in full swing and it is time to do something with all of it. Growing it and picking it is just the beginning, and then you have to figure out, are you going to eat those things fresh? Are you going to preserve them? What are you going to do with all of that goodness that you've put your time and your money, your effort, all those things into? So today we are going to talk about one of the hardest vegetables that I have found in all of our years of gardening. We've grown a garden for over 20 years now, our whole married life, and it is the top most difficult vegetable to preserve in my opinion. So in speaking to other gardeners all throughout the years, and just we live in an area where pretty much everyone grows a garden, most people always talk about, how do you can your squash? How do you freeze your squash? Squash is a very difficult vegetable to preserve and then it turn out as edible and as delicious as you want it and as it tastes like when it's fresh. Because when it's fresh, squash is one of our favorite vegetables in the summer. We love it all different ways, grilled, sauteed, all different ways, raw. But when you go to preserve it, whether you can it, and squash is a very low acid food, so we're talking about pressure canning it, or whether you freeze it, whether you blanch it first, which means you put it in boiling water for a short time and then dip it immediately in cold water and cool it off, or ice water, or whether you don't blanch it at all and you just cut it up and freeze it. It's a very highly talked about topic, is how do you preserve your squash? And I think that's because no one has found a way that they're completely satisfied with. So you can see this big old tub of squash I've got here, and this is literally just one picking. And we grow several squash plants, but not an outrageous amount, but squash can just, when it's producing, it can really produce a lot. So I've got to find something to do with all this. We like to give it away and share it with friends and family. We've sold some before in like a fruit stand type thing, but when nobody wants any, because let's be honest, when my squash is producing, so is everyone else's. So you basically have to find people who don't have a garden. And when mine is producing and everyone else's is, it's kind of difficult to find people to even get them to take it. So I am going to try something new today. Let me show you what we're going to do. So I'm gonna try my hand at freeze drying this. I've got a Harvest Right freeze dryer and I've loved it for everything that I've used it for so far. And what can it hurt? Because I don't like soggy squash. I don't like frozen squash. The frozen to me takes on a completely different texture when you thaw it out, almost like a rubbery texture to the skin, and so does canning. Or if canning doesn't produce the rubbery texture, it's just mush after you've canned it, because you have to pressure can it in order for it to be safe to be canned. I'm sure there is someone out there that's gonna say ferment it, but can you imagine if this is one picking, how much I would have fermented if I fermented that much squash? Not to mention, I would love to hear if you've done that, but I don't know what texture that would take on. And I am in this video, I'm trying to find a way to preserve it to where I can do things like saute it, things like that. Bake it, grill it, whatever, in the winter months. So we're gonna get started. We gotta get this rinsed off, chopped up, and then we're gonna just go with this. We're gonna see how it turns out. One tip I want to give you while I'm chopping this squash up is, here in the South, and I don't know how it is everywhere, but I know when it gets really hot and if your squash gets very much size on it at all, like this is a pretty decent size squash in diameter, it will get really hard. And once it does that, there's pretty much no turning back. You've passed the point of no return. So when I cut the neck off of this, you can see how this is a lot more yellow. It was tough to even cut through, so I knew that that was a lost cause. I was able to trim that part off, and the rest of this seems good and tender, and it's going to be fine. But if the whole thing seems tough and you missed it a time or two when you were picking, it'll just take one time of missing it, and you could have a huge squash, or one, even if it's not huge, if it just turns really dark yellow, but it's really meant to be this lighter yellow, you're probably going to have a tough squash in your hands, and you're better off just to get that out of your batch of food right at the beginning rather than mixing it in and then having to try to find it. So for the harvest right, you can see the depth of this tray. I think I read somewhere that that's about 3/4 of an inch thick. Don't quote me on that, but you can go as thick as this tray is, but I would just keep in mind the thicker you go, it's going to take longer to dry. But in this case, if you make yours paper thin, it's going to dry quicker, but you're going to have to do many more batches because you're not going to have as much room on your trays. So just keep all those things in mind. All right, I got it ready to go. I'm gonna sprinkle it with this Bologna Salt that I get from Squizito. I'll link that down below. And then let's pop it in. I'm hoping this is gonna be a way I can preserve food for years to come, and that this will taste good, rehydrated. And then I'm also hoping that this will make maybe sort of like a squash chip, something crunchy for a snack. So we're gonna see how this goes. I'm gonna give you an honest review. Hopefully it's gonna be good, but I mean, it may be awful, so we'll see. So it is a few days later. I actually forgot to show the end of the squash freeze drying process, but it's the same with anything I've showed you guys that I freeze dried. It got finished. I put it in just a Ziploc bag. I have actually tried it. It is delicious. I sprinkled it with some everything but the bagel seasoning, and it is delicious as is. It's really good. The skin is not tough, which happens a lot with when you dehydrate or when you freeze squash. That's the one complaint I have when you rehydrate it, just conventionally freezing it, is it's tough and it never seems to soften no matter how much you cook it. So I'm hoping this is going to be different. I'm going to put some in a bowl, put some water on it, and rehydrate it for a couple hours, and then I'm going to try to kind of saute it a little bit and just check out the texture. In the meantime, I'm going to get some other things ready to freeze dry, some fruit that I don't want to go bad that's in the fridge that I had purchased. And we've got corn to cream. We're checking out some corn creamers that we had ordered. We're trying to find kind of the perfect one to make true cream corn. So we got a lot we're going to pack into the rest of this video. So these are some sun gold kiwis that I bought. You could see mangoes and peaches. One of the best things I love about the freeze dryer that I'm using most here in my kitchen is it's saving me from throwing a bunch of stuff away. A lot of this fruit was things that I had purchased at the store and they're on their last leg. And so instead of just feeding them to the animals or something, this is going to preserve them for years to come because they're really at optimal sweetness. It's just I had purchased too much and we haven't eaten it all. So I'm gonna keep chopping. I've got some apples I'm gonna do as well, and this will be a big mixed batch of fruit, and it's clearing out my fridge and ultimately not throwing away money. The first one we tried out is the Carrie's Cream Corn Creamer. It comes with 2 pieces that have to be screwed down to something to use them correctly. The first piece is just a PVC pipe with a brush inside to remove the husk and silks. Then the creamer tube has an adjustable piece inside to cream the corn. It's pretty quick and it isn't very messy, but for us it gets a little too creamy. So secondly, we tried the Magic Corn Peeler. It worked fantastic. It was like a dream cutting the corn off, but just fair warning, it's not very creamy. It's more like whole kernel corn. So just keep that in mind. Third, we tried the Lee's stainless steel wooden corn cutter, which is what it's called online. A lot of people just call this one the Lee's corn cutter. It works good and it gets it just about perfect. The only drawback to this one is you have to be very careful not to cut your hand or finger sliding the cob to the blade. Lastly is the kernel cutter with all K's. K kernel, K cutter. It's a newer one, like this is what we've always used, but again, you still need to be careful to not cut your hand. So all in all of these are a good thing to help you make cutting off corn and preserving your corn, make the process better and more efficient. But probably about the perfect combo for us was a combination of the first and second. We had 4 people working on this, so you can have 2 people shucking and silking and everything, getting the corn prepared, and then 2 people working on cutting the corn off. And what we did is we had one using the Carrie's Cream Corn Creamer, which we told you was a little bit creamy in our opinion, and then the second one is the Magic Corn Peeler, which is the one I told you turned out kind of like whole kernel corn, and mixing those together, and it was just about perfect in our eyes. All right, I'm cooking the squash that I rehydrated and some fresh as well, but I want to show you something pretty cool. So this is the squash from the freeze dry that I rehydrated. I just added some olive oil, some everything but the basil seasoning, and you can see it is already hot, it's tender, it's already done, and this is the fresh squash. It's barely started cooking yet, so I do like this, how fast that cooked, because it was already tender. And I'm going to be honest, I've already tried it and it's really good. Now, you would have to think in advance because I did have this sitting in water for part of the day, but that's not because it took that long. It's just I got busy and I just left it in the water. So I don't know, it would definitely take a couple hours at least, maybe more. So you do need to take that into consideration. So this is what it looks like. I've already tried it. I really don't want to chew on camera, but I'm going to be honest with you guys, it doesn't taste just like fresh. The skin still has a bit of a different texture than fresh, but it is by far the best tasting way I have found to preserve squash. I've never found something that tastes just like fresh, but this hands down is the best way that I found so far. I don't like it frozen, and I really don't like it canned. So this is going to be at least a doable way for me to preserve squash and use throughout the winter. If you're interested in a Harvest Right, there's a link below. It doesn't cost you a penny more. It just tells them we sent you. I would encourage you guys. It's been a great thing for us. It's a great investment. It's a great way to save money on things that are just going bad in your fridge anyway, or garden produce, or any of those things. So I'd encourage you guys to at least think about it. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching, and God bless.